Last week, Nintendo announced that sadly they would be delaying Breath of the Wild 2 from its initial release date of sometime this year to spring of 2023, and the internet reacted with a mix and range of emotions. Now, don't get me wrong, I am very excited for Breath of the Wild 2. I loved the first one and I cannot wait to get my hands and play on this next one when it's ready. But the thing is, 2022 is already so stacked with the releases and there are such high expectations on Breath of the Wild 2 to deliver that honestly, I think we're pretty much fine without it this year. Before the delay of Breath of the Wild 2 was announced, one of the big talking points that was going around a lot is that 2022 was looking to be potentially the strongest year the Switch has ever had, and honestly, I think that still holds true. There are so many games that have been announced and are still slated for this year that unless basically all of them get pushed back to next year as well, even with Breath of the Wild 2 not being part of that lineup, it's looking really, really good. I mean, really, when you look at what are some of the biggest exclusives for the system each year, the list for 2022 as it stands right now is still one of the strongest, and there's still time for more games to get announced. Real quick, I just want to take a look at what are some of the kind of biggest name releases for the system each year. Now, some of these are going to be games that are third-party titles that are exclusive to the Switch. Some of them did end up going multi-platform eventually, but they were focused on the Switch at their initial launch. And of course, first-party titles. I'm sure there are going to be some games that I miss or don't talk about that you guys are going to let me know in the comments, but this is just kind of looking at what I think are some of the biggest exclusives for the system each year. Starting with its release year of 2017, which was a very strong opening for the system, we had some big name releases like Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Fire Emblem Warriors, Splatoon 2, ARMS, Mario plus Rabbids, and, well, it was another port, we also got PokéMoN that year. 2018 also had a pretty good flow with games like Kirby Star Allies, Mario Tennis Aces, Octopath Traveler, which did end up becoming a multi-platform game, Super Mario Party, PokéMon Let's Go, Smash Bros. Ultimate, and this was a really big year for ports and remasters of Wii U and 3DS titles, with stuff like Bayonetta 2, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, Captain Toad's Treasure Tracker, Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, and this is also the year that Nintendo experimented with Labo. 2019, another solid year with Fire Emblem 3 Houses, Astral Chain, Link's Awakening got its remake, Luigi's Mansion 3, Pokemon Sword and Shield, Yoshi's Crafted World, Super Mario Maker 2, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, we got some other ports involved like New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, and we got another kind of more interactive game in the form of Ring Fit Adventure. Now, 2020 is a year where we saw a little bit of slowdown for pretty obvious reasons, but really when you look at the list of games that came out, it was still a pretty strong one. Obviously, the big one you gotta talk about right away is Animal Crossing New Horizons. We also got Paper Mario Origami King, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, Clubhouse games, and another kind of physically interactive game with Mario Kart Live. We got a couple other ports and remasters with Tokyo Mirage Sessions FE Encore, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Rescue EX, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, of course, and we had some slightly simpler ports with, of course, the Super Mario 3D All-Stars Collection and the limited time digital-only port and translation of the original Fire Emblem. And then last year, 2021, we got a stronger year where I think a lot of games that were slated for 2020 just found their way coming out that year instead, with Bravely Default 2, Monster Hunter Rise, new Pokemon Snap, Mario Golf Super Rush, Pokemon Unite, No More Heroes 3, WarioWare Get It Together, Metroid Dread, Mario Party Superstars, SMT5, and we got some remakes, remasters, ports in the forms of things like Pokemon Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, and Skyward Sword HD. Really, when I look over these past years and all the bigger games that have released as exclusives for it, there's been a lot of great stuff for the Switch, but when you look at 2022's list, there's, I think, a couple things worth noting. First off, as far as the games that we already know of right now that are still slated for this year, a lot of them are original new titles. There are some ports and remasters still coming out this year, but I think some of those are some of the smaller releases that we know for the time being. In terms of the big name stuff a lot of people are looking forward to, a lot of it is brand new stuff. We just got through a trio of releases with Pokemon Legends Arceus or Arceus, whichever way you want to pronounce it, Triangle Strategy, and of course Kirby and the Forgotten Land. And then coming out the rest of the year, we actually have a new sports game after forever with the Wii Sports titles, with Nintendo Switch Sports coming out later this month. We're finally getting a new Mario Strikers game in June. We're getting another Fire Emblem Warriors coming out in June as well. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 got announced with a September release date, and there are of course a number of games that we've known about for some time that are finally coming out this year, or at least planned to, with stuff like Bayonetta 3, Splatoon 3, we're getting a sequel to Mario plus Rabbids, and the most recently announced big thing coming up, we are actually getting a new mainline Pokemon game already this year on top of Pokemon Legends with Pokemon Violet and Scarlet. And this isn't really touching on what I think are some smaller releases that I'm personally very excited for, because this is a really good year if you're a fan of RPGs, especially older ones that never made their way out to the States. We're getting a remake of Live Alive, which I still can't really believe is actually happening. And while it is multi-platform, I feel like I gotta point out that Chrono Cross is getting released on the Switch as well, but more importantly, as part of that is also a translation and port of Radical Dreamers, a Satellaview game. And the thing is, with all the games we do know about for 22, I don't think that's the full extent of it. Obviously, a lot of the stuff that I just talked about was really announced very recently at a Nintendo Direct presentation that was in February, and the focus of that presentation was talking about primarily games coming out in the first half. Really, the biggest game that they kind of announced for a little later than everything else was Xenoblade Chronicles 3 coming out in September. And it stands to reason that we are, of course, going to have more Nintendo Direct presentations as the year goes on. Now, it's entirely possible that all of the biggest announcements and focuses are going to be on games we already know about that are just waiting for those firm release dates for later in the year. Splatoon 3, Bayonetta 3, PokéMon Scarlet and Violet, obviously those are going to be some big focuses because we're still waiting on actual hard release dates on all of those. But it feels like, especially with the momentum we have going on right now, there's probably more that's going to get announced. Now, they're not all necessarily going to be huge big name titles that will completely make up for the loss of Breath of the Wild 2 this year, but it's going to add on to this already very stacked list. And when you're thinking in terms of having a really big tentpole release for the year, Nintendo still has one. Yes, Breath of the Wild 2 would have been a really big deal, but Pokemon Scarlet and Violet really does fulfill that kind of main, what's the biggest game Nintendo has for this holiday season. I mean, you look in terms of raw sales for each of these games, right? Yes, the original Breath of the Wild does beat out every other Pokemon game that's come out on the Switch, but it's not really that much farther ahead than Pokemon Sword and Shield. And with the momentum coming off of Pokemon Legends and just the general kind of positivity and hype that I've seen for Scarlet and Violet, especially with these starters, I feel like there's actually a much more positive mood going on for this one than there was for Sword and Shield, and considering how well that duo did, it feels like Scarlet and Violet is going to have a pretty strong launch. So sure, Breath of the Wild 2 would absolutely help kind of concretely make 2022 the strongest year the Switch has ever had, but even without it, it's a very strong contender, and depending on what other games get announced, I think it could still very much seal that title. Focusing more on just the delay of Breath of the Wild 2 itself, something that I think is important to talk about, even though I'm sure you guys have already heard this from a few people time and time again. Look, it's important the game gets its proper polish and is finished up. Obviously, getting it sooner would be really fun, but it is very important that this game is released in the strongest way possible. I mean, it's true in general that for any game, delaying to give it a better launch is a favorable choice over rushing it and having a terrible launch, but I think this is especially important for Breath of the Wild 2 because the stakes are higher given the franchise that it's a part of. Look, regardless of how you may personally rank Breath of the Wild amongst the rest of the Zelda franchise, you might think it's the best one, or you prefer the traditional style better, it is undeniable that Breath of the Wild was a really big deal. It was a breath of fresh air and a new approach for the franchise, and more importantly, really just to gaming in general, it was an interesting reset point and another way of looking at how an open world game could be handled. And so with that kind of reputation also comes the increased expectations of how do you follow up on that. You only need to look at how the delay was kind of reacted to by some people, right? Obviously there was some anger, but another thing that was happening was based on basically two little scenes that we saw in the delay announcement, people were already beginning to just dissect those two individual scenes to try and figure out any more information of what they could glean of what the plot is going to be for Breath of the Wild 2. There are so many theories and rumors and expectations already out there of what Breath of the Wild 2 can be, they really got to make sure that this launch is handled properly, because even if the final product ends up being a solid 8 out of 10 game, because of how that's going to rank and compare to people's thoughts of what it should be relative to the original Breath of the Wild, that can end up putting it in a more negative light. So if the developers think that they need an extra 6 months or so to really get this game to be where it needs to be, they should take it. So that's just a bunch of stuff that I was thinking about after Breath of the Wild 2 officially got delayed. Really, the main thing I want to emphasize for everyone is 2022 is looking to be an absolutely incredible year for the system. Don't let the delay of one major title sour it for you. Play all the other stuff that's coming out, have fun, enjoy a lot of the other great games out there, whether it's stuff on the Switch or even stuff coming out on other platforms like Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. And when Breath of the Wild 2 is ready, the wait will have been to its benefit. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button to let me know, subscribe if you haven't yet. If you didn't like the video for whatever reason, dislike it as well, just so I know that it's always useful information for me to have, and I will see you guys later.